A very good afternoon to you all. It's a joy that we have come together around the name of God and His Word. This afternoon, I would like us to look at a topic or subject that I've titled Pledge in the Church, or Pledging in the Church. And that's a deliberate title because I do not want to run away from the fact that it is an issue that we have somehow thought, talked, discussed, and tried to revisit. And yesterday, I think necessary teaching was made available and was brought to our appreciation of the biblical view of giving. And one thing that was a highlight was the fact that God has instructed His children to give to the church through tithes and offerings, to give to the needs that are identified in the church, and also outside by way of private giving, where a person promises or commits or dedicates themselves to be giving towards a particular cause. And the examples we saw in the Bible was that of giving towards the work of God. We looked at how Aquila and Priscilla were engaged in that. Philemon was engaged in that. Timothy, Onesiphorus was engaged in that. And a few other examples that we saw. Then we also did see from the scriptures that God has again instructed us to give towards special needs or projects or anything that may arise and demands our generosity as believers. We ought to arise to the occasion willingly, for that matter, and not forced to give towards that need. So in light of what we were studying and learning yesterday during our workshop, today I want to be a little more both theological and practical, but in a practical sense in which we relate to the whole idea of pledging to the church or pledging in the church. So let's begin from the top by firstly appreciating the word pledge. The word pledge. It's interesting that from childhood in my Christian walk, I have never experienced a negative response to the word pledge until in the recent past here at Evangel. And I have never known the word pledge to be perceived as wrong teaching, wrong doctrine, or wrong in any sense. I have always grown up in my Christian faith to know that there's a place in the church for both the word and the principle. And I will differentiate those, though they cannot be differentiated because they ride on the same horse. The meaning of the word and also the principle, meaning the line of thought, usage, and whatever else the grammar of English can give us, but pertains to the idea of to pledge. So it is very important, therefore, that we go to the scriptures before we have huge brush strokes on the word pledge. And maybe this may change the narrative, not so much to something new, but simply to go back to what we have known from before and uphold the truth of it than the negative. So the word pledge is both used connotatively, meaning in our common life, but it is also used in the scriptures. It is used, the word itself is used as the word pledge, but also the theology or the teaching or the principle of pledging is taught all over the scriptures without even the word pledge itself being used. It's very interesting that we would be so dogmatic against the word pledge when in the same thread, we fail to be dogmatic against the word Trinity. Now, this is what I mean. The word Trinity is nowhere found in the Bible. We don't have it written anywhere. But we all agree that when we walk through the Bible, we clearly see the doctrine of Trinity. You get the idea? The word pledge, on the other hand, is found in the Bible. And so we have also a responsibility, therefore, to walk through the Bible and see, is the doctrine of pledging in the Bible? And if it's there, what is our Christian responsibility to this doctrine or to this theology of pledging? And therefore, what role does it play both in my life as an individual and in the life of the church? And then we also take account of the fact that the Bible, like any other command or instruction to the believers, it will give us what to do, but it will also tell us the caution, and it will provide a way we should not fall into sin by that very observance of that doctrine or that teaching. So I say that just to help us to begin to appreciate, first of all, in its innocence, the word pledge. So when we hear the word pledge, the first thing, connotatively and denotatively, meaning the way it's used in the dictionary, the word pledge is a formalized promise. A formalized promise. According to Oxford Dictionary, I will read to you. The dictionary says, in its noun form, it is a solemn promise or undertaking. A solemn promise or undertaking. It gives an illustration of a promise to make a donation to some charity or to some activity. It is also used in the form of law. Those of you who are lawyers would relate to this word. A thing that is given in law, a thing that is given as security for the fulfillment of a contract or the payment of a debt, or is liable to be forfeited in the event of failure. So it's the idea that I loan me some money, and then I put either usury or I don't know what. Collateral, yes, thank you. I put collateral and say, loan me the money, and when that time comes, if I don't pay back, then you will take the collateral. That would be the second idea. So the basic idea as a noun, it is simply a solemn promise or undertaking. I commit myself, I promise, I vow, I covenant, whatever is the word that, but the principle or the theology which we'll see is the idea of something formally done. When it is used as a verb, it's simply solemnly undertaking to do or give something. It's either you commit to do something, or you commit to give something, or you commit to give something in security. So that would be the idea from the dictionary context in terms of the English. But then before I take you to the Bible, a few illustrations that suffice for that from the use of it in the English. When a couple gets married, you have witnessed to the time we bring couples in here. When a couple gets married, we always make them exchange what we call vows. We basically give them an opportunity to make a pledge of faithfulness to each other. They are basically saying, I am pledging, or I'm making a formal promise to you that I will be faithful. I will not betray this. That's what happens when we see a couple getting married. They exchange vows. They exchange a pledge of faithfulness. Another example would be when we have soldiers entering the army or high government officials swearing to enter office. What do they do? We've had ceremonies here called what? Swearing in, eh? Swearing in ceremony. They lift Bibles and they swear. They are basically pledging or promising loyalty to the country. I pledge to be loyal. I commit to be loyal. I promise. It is a formal commitment that they will do this and they will not break it. And if they broke it, they are committing to us and saying, if I broke or went against this pledge, please fire me. Take me out of the job. Okay? Another illustration would be when a witness stands in the courtroom. What do they do when they enter the courtroom? Before they begin to give their statement of witness, they pledge, they promise. And what are they pledging to? They are promising to tell the truth. I will say nothing but the whole truth, as they lift the Bible in their hands, right? I will say nothing, I don't know what the words, but trying to remember from what I've watched on TV. I promise I will tell the truth, nothing but the whole truth. So help me God. They are pledging, they are swearing, they are making an oath, they are committing to the fact that they will by no means tell a lie. So when you look at this aspect of pledging in its mere usage, you realize that there is basically nothing wrong in making a promise. There is nothing wrong in making a promise. If it comes to us who are Christians, which we'll see as we go, this promise that you're engaging yourself in, it should be a promise that will not compromise your relationship with God. I promise to do this, and I'm ensuring that the promise that I'm doing won't compromise my relationship with God. So, for example, I am given a government job, and I promise, let me not say government job. I'm given a job to do something that will go contrary to my government, and I make a pledge in that sense. That will be wrong because the pledge is going to be contrary to my relationship with God. How? My Bible says I have a responsibility of obedience and submission to my government. And so I will not enter into a pledge or a promise that will make me go against my government, and that will be against what God says. And we are told in civil understanding, I will be called a what? A traitor, right? So there could be many more other examples. So a promise is a pledge, or a pledge is a promise. A pledge is a vow. A pledge is simply taking an action that something will definitely happen in a formal way. I'm committing that I will do this. And if I don't do it, I will be held accountable for not doing it. For that reason, the Bible, or with that in mind, the Bible tells us again and again in the idea of making a pledge, and it also tells us how a pledge is managed, and it also tells us the danger of making a pledge and then you don't fulfill it. The Bible tells us all those. Let's begin from Deuteronomy. Let's look at a few scriptures beginning in Deuteronomy 24 and verse 10. Okay, so here is Moses teaching the Israelites on the idea of loans and pledges. Deuteronomy 24 verse 10. When you make your neighbor a loan, you give your friend a loan, of any sort, you shall not go into his house to collect his pledge. So the Bible is saying, somebody comes to you and say, please lend me 10,000 kwacha. If I don't pay, I'm committing my car, you will get it. So Moses is saying, when you loan your friend money, don't get the pledge, don't keep it. He says, don't do that. Look at what he says in verse 11. You shall stand outside, and the man to whom you make a loan shall bring the pledge out to you. It's up to him to make the pledge. You don't go around say, okay, make a pledge. Yes, let me have your pledge. It's up to him. It's his responsibility. He's the one who's pledging. Don't lock somebody in a pledge. Let them choose to pledge. But go further, verse 12. And if he is a poor leap in his pledge, assuming the pledge is something to dress or wear, you shall restore to him the pledge as the sun sets. Sleep in his cloak and bless you. Okay, so he pledged that I'm giving you my coat or my covering. And he says, look, if night comes or if a scenario is before him that demands the use of that pledge, give it to him. Let him use it. He'll bless you. It's his responsibility to make the pledge available. So that he sleeps in his cloak and bless you. And it shall be righteousness for you before the Lord your God. Okay, so this is what God says to the Israelites. If somebody comes and makes a formal promise to you and asks for you to lend him something, and he says, please hold this so that if I fail, don't you pursue him. And now, keep in mind, God is talking to the Israelites. He's talking to them as one family, as the Son of God. In light of us, this would be the idea of us in the church family. And I'm not talking about a business out there. I'm talking about the engagement at our relational level. Okay? So that's what God says. So here first to begin with, in Deuteronomy, we find how Moses handles the idea of pledging. He's not saying, don't do this, it's evil. He's simply saying, this is how you manage the pledge. Okay? He does not disqualify it. However, he qualifies how to manage it. Let's go to another passage in Numbers 30 and verse 2. Numbers 30 and verse 2. I'll read from verse 31, or from 1 rather. Moses spoke to the heads of the tribes of the people of Israel, saying, this is what the Lord has commanded. If a man vows a vow to the Lord, or swears an oath to bind himself by a pledge, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeded out of his mouth. Again, there is Moses. He's not saying, don't pledge. He is saying, or giving a caution. And he's saying, look, if you're going to walk this path of a pledge, you're going to vow, and after you vow, you commit something to yourself that this is what I'll do for the Lord. He says, do not break the word. Don't break what you have committed to. Get it done. Get it done. Why? And I'll show you why in Malachi. In Malachi 1 verse 14. Go to Malachi 1 verse 14. And this is what Malachi says. Cursed be the cheat who has a male in his flock and vows it, and yet sacrifices to the Lord what is blemish. So, this is what was happening among the Israelites in the book of Malachi. They commit themselves, they pledge. This is their firstborn lamb that has come out, And now they're saying, this is for God. I promise and I vow, I pledge this to be given to God. And guess what they do? When that lamb is fully grown and is ready for sacrifice, they become selfish. And guess what they do? They take something which is blemish, meaning which has a problem, which is not adequate for the sacrifice, and they keep that which they had initially vowed and then give that one which they had not. And God is saying, cursed is the cheat. If you have other versions, it will call him a deceiver. Okay? And look at what he says. This is what I'm making as a follow-up from Numbers. He says, for I am a great king, says the Lord of hosts, and my name will be feared among the nations. God is simply saying, I'm not your friend. I'm not your age mate. I'm not a little small god on idol that sits there. You just can't show up and make all these promises and pledges and vows and then show up and come and bring something else. You are joking. Try that to your earthly kings and see if they will not get you in, you won't get yourself in trouble. So God is saying, I need to be respected. You don't make a pledge. You don't make a vow. You don't just commit to something and don't do it. Proverbs says of that, it's better not to vow than to vow and break the vow. In fact, in another place, Proverbs says he who does that is a fool. So God is very serious with the whole idea of pledging. He is not saying it is not to be done, but he's saying if you're going to walk that path, you are walking a very serious place. Don't make light of it. So here's a good example. Let's derive a principle there and make a small application as we unfold the thought. We gather together, and in likeness of what Malachi says, they pledge a male lamb and then they sacrifice one is blemish. You show up and you pledge and say, you know what? This project that we have, I am going to bring 100 blocks. Okay? Oh, amen, brother, amen. Because the church needs 100 blocks to finish that place. I'm going to bring 100 blocks. Guess what you do? You show up either with 50 blocks, and then you come and say, well, that's all I could manage. God says, you are a cheat, you are a deceiver. God says, I'm not your friend that you can make such promises. Can you fulfill what you did, what you committed? That's what Malachi is saying. Or you show up, you said you're going to bring 100 blocks, and then you show up and bring the 100 blocks that are questionable. Either they were made by yourself with very minimal cement, or there were those while you were doing your project, they were being chiseled and say, I think these are the ones I think I can take to church. The Bible says you are a cheat. You are a cheat. Why is it that when it comes to the things of God, we are willing and comfortable to give things with a blemish? Why is it that when it comes to the work of God, we are willing to compromise with our pledges? And God is saying, you are better off not pledging than you pledge and you have a blemish out of it. So you pledge that you bring 100, you bring 50. You pledge that you bring 100, you bring the rejects. You pledge that you're going to bring this month, at month end, and the church keeps waiting. But brother, you said, no, next month. But brother, you said, no, next month. We had a brother in Kitwe who did that. And guess what happens? The story went on and on. The brother now became shy. He stopped coming to church. And before long, we were presenting his name as one of the people we are removing from membership. And clearly the leadership knew that the issue was the pledge. Let's go further. One more verse. Let's look at Proverbs 11. Proverbs 11:15. And by the way, when you walk through the Bible, you'll be amazed, hundreds upon hundreds of scriptures that are going to use the word pledge, or are going to use the principle of pledge, or are going to use it in the negative to avoid people doing it, or are going to use it in the positive with a caution that there is the possibility of sinning if you don't fulfill. And it tries to demonstrate that the sin is grave because it's God involved. So 15 says, whoever puts up security for a stranger will surely suffer harm. And I'm sure some of you would relate to this. You have suffered harm before by putting security for a stranger. So I remember I experienced that when I was working for the bank. I worked for the Zanaco years back, and it was very painful. That was 1994. And there I was, somebody showed up, an uncle of my workmate. And he came and was stranded, and he pleaded. He was a businessman. He was always bringing trucks of beans to sell here in Lusaka and go back. So we knew him. But I didn't have a personal relationship. So this time he shows up and he said, you know what, I am stranded. He tells his nephew, who's my workmate. And my friend says, you know, I've used up all my, whatever we call it at the bank, that I can't get a loan anymore. So he comes and says, you know what, my uncle is stranded. Are you in a position to get for him, by then 10 million kwacha, which is 10,000 today? He says when he goes back, when he brings the next truck, after he sells, he will pay you. And okay, fine, I can help. Now, I put security for a stranger. That's what the Bible is saying. And I went and I applied for a loan in the bank. It came out the same day, and I withdrew and gave him the 10,000. He was so happy, 10 million kwacha. He was so thankful and said, no, I won't disappoint you. Trust me, and all and all. The fact that his nephew is my workmate, no problem. So he left. A week later, he showed up. And I was so happy to see him. He showed me a check that, the government, because I was applying to the government, the government has paid, here's a check. Once it clears, I'll come through and drop your money. And he went, and that was the last time I saw him. I have never seen him to today. And for the next 1 year, I was paying for a loan I did not use. It was painful to receive your pay slip every day and there is loan deduction. That's what the Bible is saying. Whoever puts security for a stranger will surely suffer harm. Look at what it says. But he who hates striking hands in pledge is secure. He who hates striking hands in pledge is secure. What does that mean? It simply means to strike hands is the idea of agreeing. Okay? Let me use it in our local way. When we were young, we would call ukupingana, pingim. Okay, and we'll use the small finger. Tet pingane. Okay, and we'll pingana, pingana. If you don't, this will happen. So we would commit ourselves to certain activities, and would commit to ourselves to, kids' life was very interesting. Those who grew up in my age category would relate to it. Even those older, I can only speak for my bracket. So would pingana peta, where you make sure you folded your shirt or your short. If you have not folded and your friend shows up, your shirt or your short is not folded, you just hear a big slap from the back. And people would say, why are you beating him? And they say, no, twali pingana peta. And you see, the Bible is saying, he who hates striking hands in pledge. That's what it means. No, I don't want to find myself in such commitments. You are safe. And for sure, our friends when we were growing up who refused to pingana peta, fulama, there were all kinds of of pingana. So you make sure if you're picking something, you go on your knees. Don't bend and you just be kicked and you're flipping all over. Okay? So we would have all kinds of funny striking in pledge. Well, after we've grown, I guess that game has not changed. It's just that it has not stopped. It has now graduated as well in another form. And this time around, we strike pledge in money, in business, in all other activities, and we find ourselves committing in Chishimba and in what do they